My daughter-in-law wanted it all. She thought my son's death was her coronation. She humiliated me, thinking I was just a grieving old woman. But the will reading changed everything. One sentence, just one sentence, turned the winner into the hunted. And my son had left me, his mother, to spring the trap. My name is Margaret Holloway, but everyone calls me Maggie. At 62, I am an Irish-American widow, living a quiet life in the suburbs of Denver. Or at least, it was quiet until this morning. I was preparing breakfast, the smell of coffee filling the kitchen, when the phone rang. It was Vanessa. Her voice was clinical, as dry as winter air. Maggie, it's Daniel? He passed in his sleep. I leaned against the counter, the spatula falling from my hand. What, Vanessa? What are you talking about? His heart, she said, her tone utterly flat, devoid of the shock or ragged grief that should have been there. She sounded like she was reading a corporate memo. The doctor said it wasn't unexpected. Not unexpected, I practically shouted. I need to know what happened. I need to talk to the doctor. I have to go. Maggie. There's a lot to arrange. Before I could ask a single question, before I could even process the words, he passed. She hung up. The silence that followed was deafening. I slid down the kitchen cabinets until I was sitting on the cold linoleum floor. My son, my Daniel, gone. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at my throat. It was wrong. Everything about it was wrong. I had spoken to him just 3 days ago. He was waiting, anxiously but optimistically, for news on his heart transplant approval. He was making plans. He was fighting. This sudden, tidy explanation did not fit the man I knew. My hands trembled as I threw clothes into an overnight bag, my mind racing faster than I could move. I had to get to Dallas. I had to see for myself. As I zipped the bag, my gaze fell on the large family photo on my dresser. It was from 2 Christmases ago. Daniel, smiling, his arm around Vanessa, my teenage grandchild, caught in a genuine laugh between them. But my eyes always snagged on Vanessa, even in the staged photograph. Her smile never reached her eyes. Her gaze was sharp, assessing, like she was calculating the value of the room. On the plane, the sterile hum of the engines did nothing to quiet my thoughts. I remembered the past 2 years, the tension that had grown like a weed ever since Daniel sold his medical tech startup to that huge conglomerate, Northline Dynamics. The money, the sudden, staggering wealth, had changed things. It had changed her, Vanessa, always the ambitious ex-marketing executive, seemed to view my relationship with Daniel as a liability, a loose end. Our calls became shorter, his visits to Denver less frequent. She had built a wall around him. I arrived at their gated community, a wealthy, sterile suburb north of Dallas, and had to ring the intercom 3 times before the heavy iron gates slowly swung open. At the front door, I pressed the bell. I waited. I pressed it again. Finally, the door opened, but only halfway. Vanessa stood there. She was wearing an elegant, form-fitting black dress. Her makeup was perfect. Her hair professionally styled. There was not a single tear track on her powdered cheeks, no puffiness around her eyes. She looked ready for a board meeting, not like a woman whose husband had just died. She blocked the doorway. "Maggie, I wasn't expecting you so soon. Where is he?" I tried to step around her, a desperate need to see my son pulling me forward. She didn't budge. She held up a hand. a gesture that was both dismissive and commanding. "The house is a mess from the situation," she said, her eyes flicking past me as if checking for neighbors. "I can't let you into the bedroom." "What do you mean? You can't let me in. He's my son. I need to see him." "The funeral home already came," she said briskly, glancing at her expensive watch. "They took him. It's better to keep things clean and efficient." Clean. The word felt like a physical blow. Vanessa. Who was his doctor? What hospital? What medications was he on last night? He was fine when I talked to him. A flicker of annoyance crossed her perfect features. "Maggie, you're getting hysterical. It's best to just let him rest." She took a small step back, her grip still on the door. "You older people never want to accept reality." She ushered me onto the cold stone porch, placing a lukewarm cup of coffee in my shaking hand before closing the heavy glass-paned door, leaving me outside. I stood there, an outcast at my own son's home, trembling with a grief so profound it was turning into a cold, hard rage. I looked through the glass, into the kitchen. I watched her walk to the counter, pick up her phone, and check it. A moment later, a man I had never seen before walked into the kitchen. He was tall, wearing a polo shirt, and he was holding 2 glasses of wine. He handed one to Vanessa. She took it, raised her glass to his, and she smiled. A real smile. Then she laughed. My son was dead. His body had been hurried away, cleaned before his own mother could see him, and his wife was laughing, sharing a toast with a stranger in his kitchen. The deep, nagging unease that had plagued me for 2 years solidified into a terrible, sharp suspicion. This was not grief. This was a celebration. The funeral was held at an opulent funeral home in Dallas, the kind of place with marble floors and a heavy, expensive silence. Vanessa, naturally, was the star of the show. She played the role of the perfect widow, flawlessly, draped in designer black, her face a mask of practiced, noble grief. She drifted from person to person, accepting hugs, her voice breaking just enough as she repeated, "Daniel loved me more than anything." When it was time to be seated, she guided me by the elbow, not gently, but firmly. "Maggie, dear, why don't you sit back here?" She directed me to the second row, behind her own entourage, as if I were a distant relative and not the woman who brought him into the world. My eyes were fixed on the casket. It was polished mahogany, and it was sealed shut. A visceral, desperate need rose in me. I had to see him. I had to see my son. I found a young man from the funeral home staff standing near the entryway. "Please," I whispered, my voice thick. "I'm his mother. I need to see him before this starts. Just for a moment." The young man flushed, looking panicked. He fidgeted with his collar. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry. Mrs. Holloway was very, very clear. She wants everyone to remember him by his best image." His best image. My son, reduced to a curated photograph while his body lay hidden, hurried away from me since the moment of his death. I retreated to my designated seat, my blood turning to ice. When Vanessa took the podium to deliver the eulogy, the room fell silent. Her speech was a masterpiece of self-aggrandizement disguised as sorrow. "I gave up my career," she said, dabbing at a perfectly dry eye with a lace handkerchief. "I gave it up to dedicate myself, full-time, to caring for Daniel." She spoke of his brilliance, but only as it related to her. And then came the real message, the point of the entire performance. "He entrusted everything to me," she said, her voice resonating with false humility. "He put his entire life and his financial future in my hands." The implication hung in the air, vulgar and suffocating. She wasn't eulogizing her husband. She was announcing an acquisition. I looked around the chapel. The pews were full, but I barely recognized a soul. These were not Daniel's friends from college, not the engineers he'd started his company with. These were Vanessa's people. Sleek, sharp-eyed men and women in expensive suits, her business partners, her social circle. I saw a few of Daniel's real friends hovering awkwardly in the back, including his college roommate, Ethan. When Ethan caught my eye, he looked away, his expression pained and deeply uncomfortable, as if he were carrying a secret he was afraid to speak. After the service, in the reception room, the performance continued. Vanessa held court by the buffet, accepting condolences while subtly positioning herself as the sole survivor. I overheard her speaking to a cluster of people, her voice just loud enough for me to hear. "It's just been so much. You know," she sighed, "having to handle everything myself. His mother is, well, she's elderly, and she just doesn't understand these complex financial matters." A few pitying glances were thrown my way. I was being painted as the dotty old woman, the burden she had to manage on top of her grief. I saw my chance when Ethan was momentarily alone, grabbing a cup of coffee. I moved to his side quickly. "Ethan, thank you for coming." He flinched, looking over his shoulder. "Maggie, I'm so sorry about Dan. It's... Ethan, I have to ask." I kept my voice low. "His health. How was he? Really, these last few weeks, he sounded fine to me." He hesitated, his eyes darting toward Vanessa across the room. He had good days and bad days. Maggie." But Vanessa, she wanted everything kept very private. She managed all his appointments. "What does that mean?" "Managed." "Maggie." Vanessa's voice cut across the room like a whip. "Ethan, darling, come here. I need to ask you about the North Line contacts." Ethan gave me one last, apologetic look and hurried to her side. His escape. My conversation was over, cut off just as it began. Just as the reception was winding down, the same young funeral home employee I'd spoken to earlier approached Vanessa, looking flustered. "Mrs. Holloway, your attorney is on the line," he says. "He says the reading has been arranged for this afternoon, at the house, as you requested." Vanessa's mask of grief slipped, replaced by a flash of pure triumph. She turned, her eyes finding me in the crowd, and gave me a smile that was all teeth. "Good," she said, loud enough for me to hear clearly. "Let's get it done. That way, everyone knows exactly where they stand, and no one has any illusions." The ride back to the house was a new kind of torture. Vanessa sat in the front seat of the town car, while I was relegated to the back. Halfway there, she made a call and deliberately put it on speakerphone. "Charlotte, hi, it's me." A bubbly voice filled the car. "V, oh my God, how are you holding up, honey?" "As well as can be." Vanessa sighed dramatically. "Just so much paperwork. We're heading to the reading now. Thank God Daniel was so organized. We're looking at, well, with the final stock payout, it's close to 100 million, plus the house, plus the other portfolios. It's a lot to manage alone." I sat in the back, invisible. listening to my son's wife divvy up his life before the ink on his death certificate was even dry. I clenched my hands in my lap, my nails digging into my palms. The pain was grounding. I reminded myself who I was. I wasn't just a grieving mother. I was Margaret Holloway. I had been a charge nurse in the intensive care unit for 20 years. I had seen death in all its forms. I had seen families ripped apart by grief. And I had seen, more than once, the quiet relief of those who stood to gain. I knew what an unusual death looked like, even when it was neatly packaged as natural causes. My son had been betrayed. I felt it in my bones, a certainty as cold and hard as the suspicion I'd felt on that porch. And as the car pulled through those iron gates, I made a silent vow. I would not let his story, his life, be buried and paved over by her greed. If she had done this, I would not let it rest. Daniel's grand living room, a space I'd only seen during holidays, had been transformed. The comfortable sofas were pushed against the walls. In the center sat a long, imposing mahogany dining table, now serving as a boardroom table. A silver-haired man, introduced as Harold Pike, Daniel's attorney, sat at the head. He looked like an old-world professional, his suit impeccable. Scattered around the table were a few distant relatives I barely knew, a couple of men in suits I assumed were business partners, and several of Vanessa's friends, the same ones from the funeral. Vanessa, naturally, took the seat at the opposite end of the table, a queen holding court. She crossed her long legs, a fresh glass of red wine already in her hand. She didn't wait for Harold to begin. "Let's just get this over with," she announced to the room, her voice dripping with bored entitlement. "Just so no one has any questions later. Daniel made it clear. Everything he had passes to me. He told me that himself." I found a single, hard-backed chair near the doorway, as far from the main table as possible. I felt completely detached, an intruder in my own son's home. The air was thick with a grief that felt performative and a tension that was suffocatingly real. I watched the others. Ethan was there, near the back, looking pale. The business partners looked uncomfortable, staring at the table. Only Vanessa looked relaxed. Harold Pike cleared his throat, the sound echoing in the silence. He held up a thick manila envelope, its wax seal prominent. "This is the last will and testament of Daniel Holloway," he began, his voice formal and steady. "It was executed in my office less than 3 weeks ago. I, and my paralegal, witnessed his signature. I can attest, and I have a physician's note to confirm, that Mr. Holloway was of sound mind, clear conscience, and under no duress." Vanessa swirled her wine, a small smirk playing on her lips. Harold broke the seal and unfolded the document. He read through the standard legal introductions, the revocation of previous wills, the appointment of an executor. Then he paused. He looked up, his eyes seeming to scan the room before landing directly on Vanessa. The atmosphere shifted. It became electric. "Regarding my estate," Harold read, his voice becoming sharper, "I bequeath the following. To my wife, Vanessa Carter Holloway. I leave." He paused again, a deliberate, dramatic beat. Vanessa leaned forward slightly, her smirk freezing. "I leave." Nothing. The silence in the room was absolute, a vacuum. You could hear the faint tick of the grandfather clock in the hall. Vanessa just stared. Her glass stopped halfway to her lips. The colour drained from her face, leaving her perfect makeup looking like a mask on a porcelain doll. Then she exploded. What? The shriek was animalistic. That's not possible. You're reading a fake. She lunged from her chair, knocking it over, and scrambled toward Harold, her hands clawing for the document. He wouldn't give me that. A younger woman I hadn't noticed, a secretary or paralegal, moved with surprising speed, intercepting Vanessa and putting a firm hand on her arm. Mrs. Holloway, please. Harold Pike didn't even flinch. He simply held the document higher, out of her reach, and continued reading, his voice rising above her protests. To my mother, Margaret Holloway, I leave my entire estate, all properties, all accounts, all shares in Northline Dynamics, and all personal effects. Vanessa stopped struggling, her body going rigid. I felt my own heart hammering against my ribs. It wasn't triumph. It was a cold, terrifying realization. And one more instruction. Harold continued. He lowered the paper slightly and looked directly at Vanessa, who was now trembling, her face a mask of disbelief and fear. He was no longer just reading. He was delivering a message. Mum, I charge you with the investigation of all accounts, including, and especially, the accounts Vanessa thinks I do not know about. The room gasped. If the first part was a shock, this was an execution. Vanessa staggered back, catching herself on the table. He couldn't know, she whispered, the words tumbling out, forgetting her audience. He couldn't have known about... Harold wasn't finished. He read from a small addendum, a note Daniel had attached. A specific list has been provided to my executor. It includes account numbers for an entity known as Aspen Ridge Consulting, LLC. He read the name clearly. And a note regarding, quote, the weekly Friday transfers I have been tracking for the last 6 months. Vanessa looked like she was going to be sick. The business partners were now staring at her, their expressions a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension. Her friends looked horrified, inching away from her. Harold Pike stood up. All business. That concludes the reading. The estate will now enter probate under the executorship of my firm, on behalf of Mrs. Margaret Holloway. He gestured to the door. If you are not a party to the estate, please clear the room. We will be in touch. The room emptied in a flurry of whispers and backward glances. Vanessa was the last to leave, her attorney now at her side, whispering urgently in her ear. She shot me a look. It was no longer pity or condescension. It was pure, unfiltered hatred. When the door finally closed, Harold let out a long breath. He looked at me, his expression softening for the first time. Margaret, I am deeply sorry for your loss. Your son was a very smart man. He walked over to Daniel's study, a room I hadn't been allowed to enter, and gestured for me to follow. He opened a desk drawer and pulled out a small, plain white envelope. My name was on the front, written in Daniel's familiar, sharp handwriting. He left this with me when he signed the will, Harold said quietly. His instructions were very specific. He handed it to me, on the front, below my name. Daniel had written, for Mom, when Vanessa finally shows her teeth. I sat alone in Daniel's study, the door firmly closed against the empty house. The room smelled of him old books, a faint trace of the soap he used, and leather. My hands trembled as I slid my fingernail under the flap of the envelope he had left me. Inside was a single USB drive, silver and cold to the touch. There were also 3 pages of printed bank statements for an account I had never seen before, and a single sheet of his own stationery, folded. I unfolded it. His handwriting, usually so strong, was slightly shaky, but the words were clear. "Mum," it began, "if you are reading this, it means I'm gone, and it means Vanessa has finally shown her teeth, just like we always knew she would. I am so sorry I let her push you away. I am so sorry I didn't fix this while I had the chance." Tears welled and spilled, blotting the ink. "I thought I had more time. She is digging my grave, Mum, and she's using my own money to do it." The letter went on to detail what he had found. Regular, substantial transfers of money from his primary business account. They were all going to a limited liability company I'd never heard of, Aspen Ridge Consulting. "It's a shell, Mum," he wrote. "Registered to an old college acquaintance of hers. The transfers are listed as consulting fees, but they don't exist in any of the official company books. She's been siphoning money for months." I had to read the next paragraph 3 times before the words fully registered. "The money is bad enough, but if I didn't make it, I need you to do something for me. Do not trust anything Vanessa says about my death. Do not trust the reports she provides. Do not believe it was just my heart until you have seen the medication records yourself." A chill that had nothing to do with grief settled deep in my bones. My old nursing instincts, buried for years, surged to the surface. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. A friend from my old life in Denver. "Carla, it's Maggie Holloway." "Maggie. My God, it's been ages. How are—" "I need a favor." "Carla," I cut in, my voice flat. "You're at the county coroner's office now." "Right. I need to know about an autopsy. My son, Daniel Holloway, he passed away here in Dallas." I heard the clacking of a keyboard. A long pause. "Oh, Maggie," she finally said, her voice soft. I'm looking at the file. There was no autopsy." "What?" I stood up, gripping the phone. "A sudden death at home, for a man on a transplant list, that's not procedure. The attending physician ruled it natural causes, complications from his known cardiac condition." Carla read, her voice hesitant. "The wife, Vanessa, signed a waiver declining the autopsy, and Maggie, she requested an immediate, expedited cremation. It was scheduled for this morning." I hung up, a cold sweat covering my entire body. Cremation. The ultimate cleanup. All physical evidence. Any trace of the medications he was on. Any proof of what was or was not in his system, it was all gone. Reduced to ash. All that was left was data. Paper and digital trails, exactly the kinds of things Vanessa, with her marketing and tech background, would know how to erase. I called Harold Pike. She had him cremated. Harold. Immediately. There was no autopsy. He was silent for a beat. "Margaret, this has just moved far beyond a simple probate defense. I think it is time you met someone." The next afternoon, I sat in the polished downtown office of Simone Brooks. She was a black woman in her early 50s, dressed in a sharp, impeccable suit, and she radiated an intelligence that left no room for sentimentality. Harold had introduced her as the best estate and asset dispute lawyer in the state. I told her everything. The phone call, the funeral, the will, the letter, the cremation. I gave her the USB drive. She listened without interruption, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she leaned forward. "Let me be clear. Mrs. Holloway, she said, her voice smooth but hard as steel. Your son did not put that clause in his will as a flight of fancy. He did it because he knew he was living with someone dangerous. He knew he was in a race, and he was leaving you a weapon in case he lost. She laid out the strategy. This is now a two-front war. Front one. We defend the will. Vanessa will fight it, claiming undue influence, claiming you poisoned a sick man's mind against her. We will be ready for that. Front two. We go on the offensive. We use the investigation your son started as our leverage. She tapped the USB drive. I'm retaining a private investigator, a specialist in digital forensics, to see what's on this drive. We need to find every penny that went to Aspen Ridge Consulting, and we need to subpoena those medication records Daniel mentioned. My head was spinning. A part of me, the part that was just a mother, wanted to scream. I just wanted my son back. I wanted him to rest in peace. But as I sat there, exhausted and broken, I remembered the last line of Daniel's letter. Mom, I know this is asking the impossible, but if you don't do this, she'll just do it to someone else. That was his final word. That was my mandate. My resolve was tested that very night. I was staying in the guest room of Daniel's house, the house that was now mine. The doorbell rang, echoing through the empty halls. I opened it to find Vanessa standing on the porch, bathed in the soft landscape lighting. She was wearing a cream-colored cashmere sweater, and she was smiling, a gentle, sympathetic smile. Maggie, this has all been such a terrible misunderstanding, she said, her voice soft and full of practiced sorrow. We're both grieving. This legal fight, it's just so ugly. It's not what Daniel would have wanted. I just stared at her, my hand gripping the doorknob. I am prepared, she continued, to offer you a very generous settlement, a cash payment, several million, enough for you to live comfortably for the rest of your life. All you have to do is sign a simple document, agreeing to adjust the terms of the estate. We can resolve this quietly, just us. No more lawyers, no more digging. I looked at her, the woman who had toasted a stranger over wine while my son's body was being hurried away. The offer wasn't an olive branch. It was a bid. It was the price she was willing to pay to buy that USB drive, to bury Aspen Ridge Consulting, to stop me from looking at the medication records. She had just confirmed, without admitting a single thing, that she was terrified of what I would find. Get off my property, Vanessa, I said, my voice low and steady. We have nothing to resolve. Vanessa's response to my refusal was immediate and brutal. Within 48 hours, two things happened. First, a lawsuit was filed in probate court by a notoriously expensive Dallas law firm. The filing claimed I had exerted undue influence on my son, using his illness to manipulate him into changing his will. It painted me as a vindictive, controlling mother, greedy for a fortune that was not mine. But the legal filing was just the foundation. The second attack was far dirtier and far more public. Vanessa launched a full-scale social media campaign. Suddenly, I was a villain. My name, Margaret Holloway, was attached to blog posts titled "The Mother-in-Law Who Stole a Grieving Widow's Inheritance." Podcasts I had never heard of discussed the tragedy of Vanessa Holloway, the devoted wife robbed blind by a bitter old woman. TikTok videos used a blurred photo of me, painting me as a monster, while using filtered, angelic photos of Vanessa weeping. It was a masterful, disgusting performance. The narrative was so compelling that even a few of Daniel's old friends called me confused, asking if it was true, if I had really hated Vanessa that much. Simone was unfazed. She organized a small, precise press conference. She didn't engage in the melodrama. She presented facts. "This is the will, signed 3 weeks ago," she stated, holding up a copy. "And this is an affidavit from Daniel Holloway's licensed psychologist, dated the same day, confirming he was completely lucid, of sound mind, and not under any duress." It helped, but it didn't stop the whispers. Vanessa knew how to play the victim, and the public loved a victim. While Vanessa was busy managing her public image, Simone's investigator was managing the data. Her name was Rosa Delgado, a sharp, no-nonsense Latina woman who seemed to understand digital breadcrumbs better than I understood nursing charts. She immediately dove into Aspen Ridge Consulting. "It's a shell. Maggie," she reported back to us a few days later. "Registered in Colorado." I checked the corporate filings. "The director is a straw man, just a name on a paper, and the address is a rented postal box in Boulder." "So it's a dead end?" I asked, my heart sinking. Rosa smiled, the first I'd seen from her. "The front door is a dead end, but I followed the money from the back." She turned her laptop around. "The transfers didn't come from Daniel's personal accounts. They came from a subsidiary account at Northline Dynamics, one he had signature authority over. The e-signature on every transfer is Daniel's." "So Daniel did approve them?" Simone asked, frowning. "The signature is his," Rosa said, "but the location isn't." She pointed to a list of IP addresses. Daniel worked from home, or from his laptop at the hospital. His IP addresses are all logged. These transfers, every single one, were authorized from an IP address registered to a luxury day spa in North Dallas. I checked the spa's appointments against Vanessa's credit card. She has a standing appointment there, every Friday morning, same day as the transfers. A cold thrill went through me. It was the first piece of iron. The real breakthrough, however, came from a place I had almost given up on. Ethan, Daniel's college friend, the one who had looked so haunted at the funeral. He called me, his voice a panicked whisper. "Maggie, I have to see you. And your lawyer. Please. I think she knows I know something." We met him at a quiet diner. He was pale, dropping his keys twice before sliding into the booth. "Vanessa," he stammered. She sent me an email. I think it was accidental. It was meant for her lawyer." He pulled out his phone. The email read, "We need to make sure Ethan understands the legal ramifications of discussing Daniel's private work. He's emotional and could commit perjury if he's not careful." "It's a threat," Simone said flatly. "I know," Ethan said, his voice breaking. "Maggie, Dan was scared. The last few months. He didn't trust her. He didn't trust his own computer. He asked me to set up a private, encrypted cloud storage for him, a total backup of his sensitive files, updating in real time. He said if anything happened to him, he didn't want her to be the one to clean up his data." My heart hammered against my ribs. "Did he give you access?" "He gave me the login page," Ethan said. "But the password? He said if he wasn't around, I should ask you. He said it was our beach trip. The name of that first boat." Tears blurred my vision. A memory, sharp and sudden Daniel, 8 years old, on our trip to the coast, proudly painting a name on the side of a tiny rented rowboat, a name only he and I would ever remember. That night, I sat at Daniel's desk. I typed in the password. My world tilted. A single folder appeared on the screen, in case I don't make it. It wasn't a few files. It was dozens, meticulously organized. Scanned copies of the Aspen Ridge Incorporation papers, screenshots of the transfers, a detailed log of his calls with his cardiac team, with his own typed notes. V. Told Dr. Miller I was too weak for the call today. I was not. I feel fine. And at the bottom, a single video file, recorded by his webcam. My hand trembled as I double-clicked it. Daniel's face filled the screen. He looked tired, pale, and thin. But his eyes were furious. He looked directly into the lens, as if he were looking right at me. Right now. "Mom," he said, his voice raspy but clear. "If you're watching this, it means I didn't make it. It means she won." He took a ragged breath. "I don't know if my heart is just giving out, or if someone is pushing it." He leaned closer, his gaze burning into me. "And you know who I mean?" I sat in the dark of Daniel's study, watching the video file over and over. His face, pale and strained, filled the screen. "My cardiologist was absolutely clear," Daniel said, his voice weak, but the anger underneath it vibrating. He told me, "Do not, under any circumstances, change the dosage." He warned me. But Mom... He held up a small pill bottle to the webcam, his hand visibly trembling. "The medication I've been taking for the past week, it doesn't feel the same. The taste is off. I don't know what it is. But I'm getting weaker. I was going to have them tested. But I'm fading so fast." He leaned closer to the lens, his eyes boring into mine. "I suspect she's swapping my prescription, maybe for some cheap generic she bought online, trying to pocket the difference. Or worse." He shook his head, a look of profound betrayal crossing his face. "I don't have proof. I'm too weak to get it. That's why I'm recording this. Mom, whatever you do not trust any medical records she provides. Don't trust anyone." The video ended, leaving me in the suffocating silence. Simone, however, moved immediately. Within hours, she had filed court orders, compelling Daniel's cardiologist and his primary pharmacy to turn over his complete medical and prescription history. The records told a chilling story. For the last 3 months of his life, Daniel's primary heart medication had been refilled days earlier than the prescription allowed, every single time. And the signature on the pharmacy pickup log, waiving the consultation and accepting the early pickup, belonged to Vanessa. Rosa, our investigator, took it a step further. She subpoenaed the pharmacy's security footage. We watched the grainy, time-stamped videos, Vanessa, dressed in expensive athletic wear, impatiently tapping her credit card at the counter during her lunch hour. In one clip, she was clearly agitated, leaning in and arguing with the pharmacist. Rosa managed to get the audio enhanced. Vanessa's voice was sharp, cutting. "Look, I don't need the lecture. Just switch it to the cheaper one, but keep the old label on the bottle. It saves confusion for him." It was a damning piece of tape, but it wasn't, as Simone grimly pointed out, proof of murder. Then, the first major twist hit us. My friend Carla, from the coroner's office, called me back. "Maggie," she said, her voice hesitant. I pulled the initial intake report from the ambulance. They drew blood at the scene when they pronounced him, because it was an expected cardiac death. They didn't run a full toxicology panel, but they did run a standard screen for his prescribed meds. And I gripped the phone, my knuckles white. The levels, they were normal. Maggie. Exactly at the therapeutic dose. He wasn't overdosed. He wasn't underdosed. It felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. For a moment, I felt a strange, sickening wave of relief. My son hadn't died in the agonizing, gruesome way I had imagined. But that relief was instantly replaced by a deep, cold confusion. If she wasn't actively poisoning him, what was she doing? Okay, so she didn't kill him with a pill, Rosa said in our next strategy meeting, pacing the room. But maybe she didn't need to. Maybe she just created the conditions for him to die faster. She controlled his appointments, his information. Rosa pivoted, turning her full attention to the email cache Daniel had saved in the cloud. She found a long, sickening chain between Vanessa and Daniel's health insurance provider. We read, in horror, as Vanessa, writing on behalf of Daniel, repeatedly inquired about declining, costly, low success rate procedures. Totu, one email, sent just 2 weeks before he died, was the final nail. The patient is tiring of the fight. He wishes to pass naturally at home and wants to be removed from active consideration for the transplant list. He had never given up. His own video proved he was fighting, that he was desperate to live. She had been systematically, clinically, shutting down every door to his survival. We were still processing this revelation when the second twist came. Simone received a formal letter from the legal department of Northline Dynamics. They wanted an immediate, in-person meeting. We sat across from 2 immaculate, stone-faced corporate lawyers. Mrs. Holloway, the lead counsel began. It has come to our attention via an anonymous, but very detailed, tip that your son, Daniel Holloway, was engaged in significant financial embezzlement from the company. I felt the blood drain from my face. It was the exact, poisonous lie Vanessa was spreading on social media. Frankly, the lawyer continued, this public probate dispute is a threat to our brand. We are prepared to offer a quiet negotiation. You withdraw your claim on the estate, citing irreconcilable family differences, and we will agree to handle the financial fallout internally. We will not press criminal charges against your son's legacy. I looked at Simone. Her expression was perfectly calm, but her eyes were blazing. I understood instantly. This was Vanessa's master plan. She hadn't just planned for his death. She had planned for this exact contingency. She was the one siphoning money through Aspen Ridge Consulting. To cover her own theft, she had built a parallel, detailed, and plausible case to frame Daniel as the thief. If he died, and she inherited, she could quietly bury the evidence. But if he cut her out, as he did, she would deploy this nuclear option, threaten to destroy his reputation to force me to back down. As we left the building, Simone turned to me in the elevator. You see it now, don't you? She said, her voice low and furious. This was never just about the money. Maggie, this is about controlling the narrative. She's not just trying to steal his estate, she's trying to steal his name. The game just changed. This isn't about who inherits. It's about who survives this reputation storm. Vanessa's counteroffensive was swift and public. Having failed to buy me off, she decided to bury me. She appeared on a local Dallas morning talk show, a bastion of soft lighting and sympathetic interviews. She was brilliant. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her voice thick with manufactured sorrow. She wept as she told the host about the nightmare she was living. She spoke of a mother-in-law who had always been cold, who had never approved of her. Then came the outright lies, each one delivered with a devastating, believable tremor. She claimed I had slapped her during an argument over Daniel's care. She claimed I had tried to prevent her from seeing my own grandchild. The final, vicious twist was when she leaned in, dabbing her eyes, and whispered about how grief and age had made me unstable and obsessive. I sat in Daniel's kitchen, watching on the television he had bought, my hands shaking with a rage so profound it made me nauseous. I called Simone, my voice tight. "She's calling me crazy on television." "Good," Simone replied, her voice perfectly calm. "She is loud, she is sloppy, and she is making provable accusations. Let her talk. People who tell this many lies eventually contradict themselves." The ugliest part was her attempt to drag my grandchild into her public relations war. But my grandchild, a bright college student, refused to be her pawn. They declined to appear on any show. Instead, I received a call late one night from a blocked number. "Grandma." The voice was strained, hurried. "I can't talk long. Mum. She's got everything locked down. But I just wanted to say, I've known for a long time that Mom is strange about money. Really, really strange. Don't believe what she's saying about you." The line clicked dead. It was a sliver of light in the darkness, proof that the family she described was a complete fabrication. While Vanessa was busy building her public narrative, Rosa was methodically tearing down the private one. She focused on the anonymous email sent to Northline Dynamics, the one accusing Daniel of embezzlement. The IP address was from a public Wi-Fi network, Rosa reported, sliding a map across Simone's desk. A coffee shop in North Dallas, directly across the street from an exclusive private gym called Elite Form. Guess who has a standing 10 a.m. appointment there every single day? Rosa's investigation didn't stop. She learned Vanessa's personal trainer was a man named Liam Ward, at least 10 years her junior. Rosa pulled the coffee shop's security footage for the exact date and time the email was sent. We gathered around her laptop. The grainy footage showed a small table near the window. We saw Vanessa, in her expensive gym clothes, sitting across from Liam Ward. His laptop was open. We watched them both lean in, typing, pointing at the screen. Then, Liam looked around, nodded, and hit the enter key. Vanessa broke into a wide, triumphant smile. She leaned across the table and kissed him. Not a peck, but a long, celebratory kiss. Rosa saved the file. We had it. The proof that Vanessa and her lover had fabricated the entire embezzlement story. Simone and I decided it was time to deploy our own strategy. We requested a reconciliation meeting with Vanessa at a quiet, absurdly expensive hotel bar. We claimed we were ready to discuss a settlement. Rosa had the table wired for audio. Vanessa arrived, radiating confidence, clearly believing her media campaign and the Northline threat had worked. "I'm so glad you've finally seen reason, Maggie," she said, signaling for a martini. She grew bolder with every sip. "Honestly," she slurred, leaning in, "I was just saving myself before the whole ship went down. Daniel was sick. It was always a matter of time. He didn't even know what he was doing half the time." I sat frozen, my face a mask of stone. It was pathetic, really. She laughed, a high, thin sound. I had to push him to sign so many things near the end. His hand was shaking too badly to even hold the pen. I felt Simone's hand grip my knee under the table, a silent signal to stay calm. We had what we needed. The real break, the one that blew the case wide open, came 2 days later. Liam Ward appeared, unannounced, in Simone's lobby. He was pale and sweating. "She's going to betray me," he blurted out, sitting in our conference room. We had a joint account where the Aspen Ridge money was going. I checked it this morning. It's empty. She transferred every dime to a new account in Miami. She's cutting me loose. She's going to leave me to take the fall for the fraud. He was terrified, and he was ready to talk. In exchange for Simone arranging a meeting with the district attorney and a potential immunity deal, Liam turned over everything, every text message, every email, and a short audio recording he had secretly made on his phone. We listened to Vanessa's voice, not the weeping widow from television, but this voice, cold and hard as ice. "Just get his mum to sign the papers, and it's over. If she doesn't, I don't care. I'll let the court and social media crush her into dust. The old bitch won't know what hit her." The very next day, Simone and I walked back into the Northline Dynamics boardroom. "We are here," Simone announced, "to answer your questions about the anonymous tip." She played the coffee shop video. She played the audio of Liam and Vanessa. She presented the bank records showing the money flowing from Aspen Ridge directly to them. The corporate lawyers went rigid. They understood, in that instant, that their company had been used, that Daniel Holloway was the victim, and that Vanessa was the criminal. Their demeanor changed from adversarial to allied. They were now on my side, if only to protect their own reputation. As we walked out, I felt the first true easing of the pressure in my chest. Back in her office, Simone permitted herself a rare, thin smile. She pulled out Daniel's will. "There's one more thing," she said. "A clause I haven't focused on until now, because we needed Northline on our side first." She pointed to a paragraph near the end. It stated that a certain percentage of all annual profits from his Northline shares were not to go to me, but were to be diverted into a charitable foundation. "A foundation," Simone read aloud, "bearing my name, to be controlled exclusively by my mother, Margaret Holloway, for the express purpose of correcting any and all falsehoods or wrongs perpetrated in my name." I stared at her. Daniel hadn't just left me his money. He had left me a fully funded, permanent weapon to fight for his legacy. The day of the first hearing in probate court felt like a sickening, public premiere. The room was packed to the gills. I saw the slick haircuts of the local media, a solid, unmoving row of suits from Northline Dynamics, and the hushed, curious faces of people who had, at one time or another, been friends with either Daniel or Vanessa. The air was thick with anticipation. The hearing's purpose was straightforward: to rule on the validity of Daniel's will and dismiss Vanessa's countersuits. Vanessa's lawyer, a shark in a $2,000 suit, clearly thought he had one last dirty card to play. He approached the bench with a stack of glossy photographs. "Your Honor, before we begin, the petitioner must submit evidence of undue influence and gross bias, which speaks directly to the state of mind of the plaintiff, Margaret Holloway." He projected the images onto the large courtroom screens. My stomach lurched. It was me, having dinner, caught mid-laugh with Simone. It was another photo of me on a park bench, in deep conversation with a kind-looking, silver-haired man. "This man," the lawyer announced, his voice booming, is Dr. Alan Mercer, a widowed cardiologist. We have records showing dozens of calls and meetings between him and Mrs. Holloway. We contend that this lonely, grieving mother has entered into a romantic relationship with Dr. Mercer, whose professional opinion she is now using to attack my client. He wasn't finished. This biased testimony from an involved party must be stricken. Furthermore, he gestured to the photo of me and Simone. Her relationship with her own counsel is clearly not just professional, but deeply emotional. We question the ethics of this entire proceeding. I was speechless, my face burning with humiliation. Simone rose slowly, the picture of calm. "Your Honor," she said, her voice clear and cold. "My client's personal life is not on trial here. Dr. Mercer is a kind man who lost his own wife to a cardiac condition and graciously offered to help Mrs. Holloway review her son's complex medical files. His analysis, which we have submitted, is based on objective, verifiable data pharmacy records and insurance emails. We are more than willing to have a second, or even third, independent expert confirm our findings." She paused, then turned slightly toward Vanessa. "Perhaps the petitioner, who claims my client's analysis is biased, could offer one single expert opinion from any doctor who supports her version of events she has not." The judge frowned, his displeasure obvious. "The expert analysis of the medical files remains in the record. Your client's dinner schedule is irrelevant. Counselor, let us move on to the only question that matters today. Was Daniel Holloway of sound mind? And was he under duress when he signed this will?" Simone smiled, a thin, sharp expression. "To answer that, Your Honor, the defense calls Harold Pike to the stand." Harold, Daniel's longtime attorney, was the physical embodiment of integrity. He sat, adjusted his microphone, and described his final meeting with my son. Mr. Holloway was lucid, focused, and angry. Harold stated, his voice resonating with authority. "He brought me a file documenting irregular expenditures. He was the one who dictated the terms of the new will. He told me, and I quote, 'If I don't get the chance to unmask her myself, my mother will.'" Next, Simone called Ethan. Daniel's old friend was pale but resolute. He told the court how Daniel had asked him to set up the encrypted cloud storage. "Why?" Simone asked. "He didn't trust his wife," Ethan said, his voice gaining strength. "He was afraid she would erase his work, his files, his history." Simone then signaled the clerk. "We will now play a video file recovered from that cloud storage." Daniel's face filled the monitors. He was thin, and he was tired, but his eyes were sharp, and his voice was clear. The entire courtroom sat in stunned silence as my son spoke from beyond the grave, detailing his suspicions, and ending with the line that sucked all the air from the room. "My mother is the only one I trust to keep the story straight. The only one." Vanessa, who had been sitting rigidly, seemed to shrink. "And finally," Simone said, her voice dropping, "the defense calls Liam Ward." If Vanessa had shrunk before, she now went rigid. She stared, her mouth slightly open, as her lover, the man from the coffee shop, walked slowly to the witness stand, refusing to meet her gaze. Simone was ruthless. First, she played the coffee shop security footage. The entire court watched Vanessa and Liam huddle over the laptop. We watched them compose the anonymous email. We watched them toast. We watched them kiss. Vanessa's lawyer screamed, "Objection irrelevant." It speaks directly to the petitioner's credibility and her conspiracy to defame the deceased. The judge snapped, "Overruled. Continue." Ms. Brooks. Simone then produced the text messages and the audio recording Liam had provided. She read Vanessa's words into the court record, her voice ringing with cold contempt. "Just get his mum to sign, and it's over. I'll let the court and social media crush her into dust. The old bitch won't know what hit her." Each word was a nail in Vanessa's coffin. The grieving widow persona was ripped to shreds in front of the media, the Northline executives, and the judge. It was too much. The carefully constructed facade didn't just crack, it exploded. Vanessa leapt to her feet, her face a grotesque mask of rage and disbelief. "Traitor!" she shrieked, her voice echoing in the chamber, her shaking finger pointed at Liam. "You worthless, stupid traitor." The room erupted. Reporters surged forward. Vanessa's lawyer tried to grab her arm, but she thrashed, sobbing, screaming, collapsing into a hysterical heap. The judge slammed his gavel, his voice roaring over the chaos. "Order, order. I will have order." Bailiffs moved in to restrain Vanessa. The judge watched her, his expression stripped of any last shred of patience or sympathy. It was the look of a man who had seen the truth. It was over. Vanessa's courtroom breakdown was not the end. It was, I learned, merely the end of the beginning. The following day, Simone received a call from the district attorney's office. The public evidence from the hearing, combined with the detailed files Rosa and Liam had provided, was more than enough. "They are prepared to open a criminal investigation," Simone told me, her voice carefully neutral. "Corporate fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, forgery. They have a strong case." The news landed not with a sense of triumph, but with a heavy, sickening thud. I was faced with a choice I had never anticipated. If I supported the criminal prosecution, this would drag on for years. Daniel's name would be linked with hers in every headline. It would be a permanent stain, a circus of scandal. The alternative was to use this criminal threat as a hammer to force a swift, comprehensive civil settlement, to simply end the noise and let my son rest. That evening, I had dinner with Alan Mercer, not as a romantic partner, as Vanessa's lawyer had so crudely suggested, but as a friend, a man who understood loss. Over a quiet meal, he put into words what I had been struggling with. "Maggie," he said, his voice gentle, "from everything you've shown me, Daniel wasn't killed by a single, clear-cut act of poisoning. He died from a cascade of terrible medical decisions, guided by someone who wanted him to give up. She didn't have to actively kill him. She just had to stop saving him." His words reframed my grief. The white-hot rage that had been fueling me began to cool, replaced by a profound, hollow sadness. It wasn't a simple crime of passion. It was a systemic, calculated erosion of his will to live. Any hesitation I had about letting Vanessa off the hook vanished when Rosa showed me her latest social media post. From a new, anonymous account. Vanessa was live streaming, claiming she was a victim of a sexist, good old boy legal system that was protecting a wealthy corporation. She was still performing, still twisting my son's story to fit her narrative. My resolve hardened. I didn't just want the money back. I wanted her silenced. Simone proposed the perfect strategy. "We let the DA's office proceed," she said. "We give them our full cooperation. We let that criminal threat hang over her head, but we tell them we are open to a civil resolution first. The plan was to demand everything full repayment of every dollar from Aspen Ridge, the surrender of the house, a permanent, legally binding waiver of any and all future claims, and a court order forbidding her from ever using Daniel's name, image, or story for any commercial purpose. Faced with the very real possibility of prison, Vanessa's bravado crumbled. She agreed, through her shell-shocked attorney, to a private, judge-mediated settlement conference. We sat across from each other in a sterile conference room. Vanessa was pale, her makeup unable to hide the terror in her eyes. Her lawyer did all the talking, agreeing in principle to almost every one of Simone's demands. It was happening. It was almost over. And then, just as the judge was preparing the final draft, Vanessa looked up, her eyes locking on mine. She placed a hand on her stomach. "There's one more thing," she said, her voice trembling but with a new, strange note of confidence. "I am pregnant." The air left the room. My heart stopped. A grandchild. Daniel's child. "It's Daniel's," she whispered, and for the first time, tears that looked real welled in her eyes. "You can't take everything from his child." I was stunned, thrown completely off balance. The entire legal framework, the fight, the anger, it all evaporated, replaced by this shocking, impossible possibility. I looked at Simone, lost, but Rosa, who was sitting just behind me, leaned in. She whispered in my ear, her voice barely audible. "Maggie, check the cloud, the medical files, Daniel's treatment protocol. I saw it last night. After his first round of chemo, his doctor warned him he was almost certainly infertile." The blood drained from my face. I looked at Vanessa, who was now weeping into her hands, playing her last, desperate, biological card. Simone, who had heard Rosa's whisper, did not miss a beat. She looked at Vanessa with an expression of pure, cold pity. "That's a very serious claim," Simone said, her voice calm. "Naturally, if this child is Daniel's, it will be provided for. We will, of course, require a court-ordered paternity test the moment the child is born." Vanessa's head snapped up. Her sobs stopped instantly. The colour drained from her face, her eyes wide with the panic of a cornered animal. She hadn't expected a challenge. She had expected to paralyze me with morality. She couldn't answer. She just stared, her mouth opening and closing. The shield she had thrown up had just become her newest, most glaring liability. That night, I sat alone in Daniel's living room. It was no longer a home. It was a staging ground, filled with boxes of legal documents, bank statements, and the artifacts of my son's life that I had to sort through. And for the first time since that first, numb phone call, I put my head in my hands, and I wept. I cried for my son. I cried for the life he lost, for the grandchild that would never be. But mostly, I cried because I was so very, very tired. This fight, this quest for revenge, had consumed me. It had become my entire life. And sitting there, in the quiet darkness of my son's house, I finally knew, with absolute certainty, how I was going to end it. The final day in court felt different. It wasn't a hearing, it was a formality. The room was just as packed, but the electric tension was gone, replaced by the silence of an inevitable conclusion. This time, the executives from Northline Dynamics were not sitting in the neutral center. They were sitting in the row directly behind me and Simone. Their lead counsel was permitted to make a brief statement to the court. Your Honor, he said, his voice ringing with corporate authority. Northline Dynamics wishes to state for the record that an internal audit has been completed. We have found no evidence of wrongdoing by the late Daniel Holloway. He was, and remains, an employee in good standing. We are cooperating fully with the District Attorney's Office regarding the fraudulent activities of Mrs. Vanessa Holloway. It was a public execution. Vanessa's entire counter-narrative, her only defense, was dismantled. Before her attorney could even respond, a woman from the county DA's office stood up. Your Honor, she said, I am here to inform the court that, based on the evidence provided by this civil case, we find sufficient cause to bring criminal charges against Mrs. Vanessa Holloway for corporate fraud, conspiracy, and financial forgery. We have an arrest warrant prepared. A wave of camera shutters and whispered shocks went through the room. However, the prosecutor continued, we will defer execution of this warrant pending the successful and full completion of this civil settlement, provided it meets the state's requirements for total restitution. I finally looked, really looked, at Vanessa. This was not the glamorous widow from the funeral or the defiant sociopath from the talk show. She was sallow, her expensive suit hanging on her. She looked thin, old, and absolutely terrified. Her lawyer was whispering frantically in her ear, and I could just make out his words. It's this, or it's prison. This is the only way out. You must agree to everything. Simone rose, her voice calm and devoid of triumph. She simply stated the facts. She presented the settlement agreement. It was total. Vanessa would repay every single dollar siphoned through Aspen Ridge Consulting. She would immediately surrender the deed to the house and all its contents. She would sign a permanent, irrevocable injunction, barring her from any and all claims to Daniel's estate, now and forever. She would be forbidden from contacting me or my grandchild. And, most importantly, she would be barred, for life, from using Daniel's name, likeness, or story for any commercial purpose, including interviews, social media, or books. The settlement required the court record to reflect that all accusations of embezzlement she had made against my son were proven false and baseless. The judge looked down at Vanessa, his face a mask of granite. Mrs. Holloway, you have heard these terms. You are under oath. Do you understand what you are giving up? Vanessa stared at her lap, her throat working. Mrs. Holloway, the judge repeated, his voice sharp. A small, choked sound came from her. Yes. Do you agree to all these terms, freely and without coercion, in light of the criminal investigation pending against you? She looked at the DA, then at me. Her eyes were no longer hateful. They were just empty. I agree, she whispered. Sign the documents, the judge commanded. We watched as she signed page after page, her hand shaking so badly the signature was barely a scribble. She was signing away the life she had murdered to obtain. The moment the judge accepted the signed agreement, Simone stood up one last time. Your Honor, with the settlement now concluded, the plaintiff has one final piece of evidence from Daniel Holloway's cloud storage. It is a segment of the video the court has already seen, but a part we reserved until this moment. The screens in the courtroom lit up again. Daniel's face. He looked so tired. He looked directly into the camera. If Vanessa is sitting in a courtroom, he said, his voice raspy. Listening to this, it means Mom did what I never thought she'd have to. She didn't let them bury the truth with me. He took a ragged breath. I made this will of my own free choice. I was sound of mind. I knew exactly what I was doing. He paused, and his eyes seemed to find mine, to see me right here, right now. Mom, I know you. You'll feel guilty. You'll want to find a way to forgive. But if you have to choose between forgiving her and protecting other people from her, please, Mom, choose the second. A single tear slid down my cheek, but I nodded. Just a small movement. I finally understood. This was his true final instruction. By accepting this civil settlement, by keeping the criminal charges hanging over her head like a guillotine, by stripping her of her money, her platform, and her name, I wasn't just getting revenge. I was protecting others. I was fulfilling his wish. The judge's voice was firm, concluding the matter. This court finds the will of Daniel Holloway, dated 3 weeks prior to his death, to be valid. The entirety of the estate is hereby awarded to Margaret Holloway. The civil settlement is ratified and entered into the record. Mrs. Vanessa Holloway is hereby forbidden from contacting the plaintiff or making any financial claim, now or in the future. All accusations against the deceased are ruled baseless. The gavel struck. It was done. Outside, a swarm of reporters blocked my path, microphones shoved in my face. "Maggie, are you happy you won?" one of them shouted. I stopped. I looked at the cameras, the lights flashing, the hungry faces. "There is no victory in losing a son," I said, my voice clear and steady. I just made sure his story wasn't distorted. I turned away from their questions and walked toward the car Simone was holding open. I knew exactly what I had to do next. Tomorrow, I would call the bank. I would start the foundation. The one Daniel had written into his will. The fight was over. The healing, I hoped, could finally begin. Thank you all so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from, so please drop a comment below and share your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary and like this video. And if you really want to support the channel, please hit that hype button so this story can be heard by more people.